All right, so Wayne Story says, I'm enjoying this. Peter, what TR would you recommend? I like the TBS TR by Scrivener, but I realize that some readings he footnotes may be better readings. A reading in his text may have only support for Erasmus, while the footnote has a better reading supported by both majority and CR texts.
This is a question for me?
Yes. Yeah, it was. He directed it to you.
I mean, I this is my copy of Scrivener right above me. I did not do that just for this show, you know. I use Scrivener all the time. I love it. And in fact, you know, I just finished writing an article where I defended 4 TR, sorry, not TR, I shouldn't call them TR, although they are in the TR, 4 Byzantine readings in the Gospel of Matthew where I think the critical texts are wrong. So, you know, to James's point, I'm very happy to follow the Byzantine manuscripts, even against the early evidence, when I think the internal evidence is very strongly on their side, and in each of the 4 cases that I argue. Okay, so I almost can't do 1.2 with Peter because he speaks so quickly, but you know, what he's saying is, now Peter really emphasizes, see, within reasoned eclecticism, you also have different camps. You have those who emphasize, who would lean toward the side of external evidence, and those who would lean toward the side of internal evidence. External evidence is more objective, at least in the sense that you're talking manuscripts, dates, locations, things like that. The internal can become more subjective in the sense that you may be arguing author style, standard scribal error issues, homoteleuton, haplography, whatever. And so it can be taken multiple ways. You know, most people try to find some balance between the two. I think what I'm hearing Peter saying is he's more on the internal side by what he just said in taking a Byzantine reading over against much earlier manuscripts. And that, in the history of textual criticism over the past 50 years, you've sort of seen that balance swing a little bit, depending on who you're reading and what's in favor at that particular point in time. For my article, that's exactly why I do. So anyways, yeah, but to the question, Scrivener is great. If you find a reading in a footnote that you think is better, good, great. You know, if it is, I mean, keep working on your judgment and your text critical skills. Perfect. Okay, now we've got one more for you, Peter, and then I'll see if I can find one for Jeff and James as well. But this is from Steve Bauer. He asked this question about an hour and a half ago. Said he's going to bed and wanted to get the question in. Anyways, hey, and the question if you've gone to bed. Well, yeah, he said, well, I'm going to get my popcorn and see if I can watch this video sometime later, but I'm going to get my question in anyway. So, anyways, Steve, if you get a chance to watch this, we did get your question in. So, all right. So, Peter, he says this: if, as Royce has shown, I might not be pronouncing that correctly, and somebody still, for whatever reason, anytime somebody types a new comment in, it jumps me all the way to the bottom. So, okay. He says, if as Royce has shown, in the early papyri the tendency was to omit, is there a consensus as to what time frame the tendency to add, through harmonization, for example, begin? Now, that's a good question, and it's a very technical question. Royce's work on 5 or 6 papyri, the major early papyri, including P45, which is what I've done most of my interaction with Royce on, but also P75 and P66 and things like that. Royce's focus was upon what's called singular readings, where, for example, P66 would have a reading that no other manuscript has. Peter interacted from a opposite perspective with some of Royce's material in his dissertation. Royce is always something that has to be dealt with, but hasn't taken the field. I mean, it's a magisterial work. I mean, just the amount of work that went into it is just astonishing. But it hasn't taken the field, in that most of us would feel that those singular readings are not necessarily the best way of analyzing what any particular scribe's tendencies are going to be in the accuracy of the transmission of the text that they're copying. So what the person's saying is Royce came to the conclusion that in the papyri they tended to drop phrases. And so he's asking, given that the later text is longer by a percentage point or two, when did that change from the period of the early papyri into, say, after 1000, when you have... my answer would be, it would seem that once you have monasteries doing copying rather than that very turbulent early period where all those manuscripts came from the period of Roman persecution. Once you don't have Roman persecution going on, then I think you didn't have quite the pressure in the making of manuscripts, and then you would have more harmonization because it's being done by people who have constant exposure to the scriptures, maybe by having copied multiple copies before and stuff like that. So,
yeah. So the argument I just talked about, the article, is actually on that point about whether we should prefer shorter reading or not, and I argue I don't think we should, in principle, prefer the shorter reading. I do think it's evident that scribes do have a tendency to add things to manuscripts, but I don't think it's necessarily stronger than the tendency to omit things accidentally, for example. But I do think what you find is over time, scribes are, if they're confronted with two texts and one is shorter and one is longer, I think their tendency very much would have been to preserve a longer reading and not risk. Frankly, it's the same impulse that I think Jeff has, and that is it's a desire not to lose scripture. There's a deep concern about that on the part of scribes, and so if they have to choose, they'll choose a longer reading if they have to make a choice. If we can identify a certain period in which that switches, I'm not sure. In my own research, I approached with a different method than James Royce did. So really what James Royce found was that the early papyri, the substantial early papyri that he looked at, 6 of them, show a tendency to omit in what are called singular readings. And singular readings are readings found only in one manuscript, okay? And part of the big debate about his method is whether singular readings are really indicative of scribal habits as a whole. Yep. And my co-editor, Elijah Hickson, his dissertation tackles that problem head on. He does not think so. In my own research, I don't think so either. So I don't think Royce's method is completely wrong by any means, but I also don't think it gives us a complete picture of what scribes did. So,
James, you want to comment on that real quick, and then I've got a question for Jeff.
Research by Alan Farnes and by Hernandez on Revelation, and they both point in the same direction.
Right, but if you look at some others, they don't. See, and that's part of the problem. So the question is, even if all the studies using singular readings pointed in the same direction on this question, we're still only looking at singular readings, and we all know that scribes made more changes than just what's in the singular readings, right? So that's the question.
All right, go ahead. Yeah. All right, that'll wrap that.
I was going to say, singular readings was picked because it's easy to tell, compared to other cases.
It's not just because it's easy to tell, actually. I talk about this in my dissertation as well. So it's not.
Given the time, I may skip some stuff I really wanted to deal with, but let's.
Point you were talking about, people, churches that may have held to the so-called shorter ending of Mark. I would say they were wrong. They were in error. Or as I was reading in Eusebius's church history in book 6 and chapter 12 the other day about Serapion of Antioch writing to the church at Rosas, who had accepted the gospel of Peter and were reading it. And he had to write to them and say, no, Gospel of Peter is docetic, and you have to reject that.
Right.
So,
but yes, that's not an issue with the woman caught adultery.
Yes,
that's not an issue with the woman caught adultery. It's not a question of whether it's heretical or not. On all of our views, the woman caught adultery is good theology, is it not?
Well,
don't you think it's good theology?
It's not.
Of course you think it's good theology, but so do I.
The example, though, applies because the Serapion of Antioch example, the Gospel of Peter, could be applied to if there was a church that was
I'm not saying that if a church does something, therefore it's okay. That's not at all what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is when you look at the history of the manuscripts, you realize with something like the Comma Johanneum, most Christians reading 1 John in Greek have not read that text. So even on your view, if you think that the Comma Johanneum is original, should be read by churches, you still have to recognize that there have been lots and lots of people in church history who have not done so. And my question to you is, do you think their faith was fundamentally flawed as a result? And the answer is no.
First of all, there were a lot of presuppositions in that. First of all, you presume that because the extant manuscripts don't have it, that meant that most Christians did have. I don't know.
Well, most Christians we have evidence for in Greek. That's what I said. But, no, most Christians we have evidence for in Greek did not read the Comma Johanneum. It doesn't matter if most. You
can't actually say that because you only have 5 manuscripts pre 700.
Now, hear what's being said here. So he has no evidence, none, of the presence of that text in sermons, this is exactly what happened with Ephesians 3:9. So once you start with this, then history becomes twisted. What Peter's saying is that we have no evidence that anyone was reading these words. Does that mean that they had a defective faith? And he's like, well, we don't know they weren't reading these words. Even though I can't give you a shred of evidence that they were, you can't disprove it. Well, that's, again, this is the luxury of not actually having a textual critical position that you're actually defending. You're defending a conclusion, you're defending a text, you're not defending a textual critical methodology, because you could never derive a text using this type of reasoning. This is what TR-onlyism cannot produce a text, it can only promote a text. And here it is being, and you can see the look on James' snap face. He's going, what are you doing? And it's the same frustration we all have.
You say that the people who had the extant manuscripts did not have it within theirs, but even that doesn't mean that their faith in and of itself was flawed, or that they weren't saved or converted. But it does mean that they suffered a deficiency, that they missed out on a benefit that they might have
But
received.
they didn't. How big was it? How big was the benefit? They had the Trinity without that
Medieval
verse.
manuscripts didn't spring out of the ground from dragon's teeth. They're echoing earlier copies, so you can make the extrapolation. There's no reason to think the earlier copies of those echoes.
Well, we've already established that, but
Yeah,
I don't think Jeff
I'm
accepts
good on that.
The same way when a voice goes forth and the echo doesn't have the words, you deduce that the voice didn't have the words.
But it is a problem.
We hear the voice from the old Latin.
I don't think you're going to convince Jeff of that.
It is a problem. It is a problem. I mean, go back to the ending of the book of Revelation. You know, we're not supposed to add. We're not supposed to take away. And so there is,
which has nothing to do with this at all. When I start hearing people grabbing for texts like that, as if that is a textual critical statement in defense of a text that does not appear in Greek manuscripts until well after 1000 AD, and it's really more like 1300 AD, I'm concerned, because I've seen that from King James Onlyists for a long, long time. But this man is a fellow Reformed Baptist pastor. Should know better, but is promoting something otherwise.
there is an issue of the preservation of the Word of God. And so, yes, there is a problem if there's a part of the Word of God that's an inspired Word of God that is being omitted.
Sure, but let's put that in context. How big of a problem is it?
Somebody just throwing something into the Word of God from the old Latin that was made up by an interpreter. There's a problem there too.
And that's
there would be a problem with addition as well.
Right.
And there's a problem with
in the Communianium.
Yeah. So this is what I'm trying to say.
You can see the Communianium originate in Latin, and you can see how it's drifted into the Greek from the Latin. You can see the mechanism that caused it to be created in Latin, and you can see that it's nowhere except in Latin, and yet suddenly we're supposed to think, well, we're getting a little into that specific where I think you wanted to start wrapping up, but you can see where the general picture is. I think the real problem is that confessional ecclesiology, even though it's often claimed we don't reconstruct the text, that's because you just pick your favorite reconstruction that was made in the 1500s and lock it in and say that's the text.
Bing, 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 bing.
Before the printing press, you couldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. You would look at the manuscripts and do textual criticism. Ecclesiastical bibliology is basically an excuse to not do the work, pretending that it's already been done.
So it's just laziness.
We all know that it hasn't been done. Yeah,
I wouldn't call it.
I don't think it's a matter of laziness. It's a matter of confessional conviction.
Well, can I jump in? I don't think it's.
The statement is wrong because the text was purely not kept that way in that sense. It's not pure in its exact form, the way that you're defining that as. It's simply not.
Would you say, Jeff?
See, I really hate to see my confession being dragged around like this, and one of the reasons I'm doing this, I'm hoping people understand this is not confessionalism. This is a one-off, strange misinterpretation, misapplication. It's ahistorical. The framers did not have the information we have today, and so but again, Snap's exactly right. It just refuses to do the work, but that's because it can't do the work. It has no foundation upon which to do the work. That's the issue. That's the issue.
Would you say that your confessional position is partly driven by a fear of the alternative position, namely mine? As a fear of where it leads?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think
there's something to be afraid of in my view?
I think that there's nothing wrong with seeing dangers, and it's right to be fearful of something that's dangerous.
Right. So you're afraid of the dangers you see in my view.
Well, yes, but I also have a love for what I think is right and true, and a zeal for what is right and true. So just as I think, I mean, if I were to turn that around, I mean, and to say, so far what I've heard is confessional text advocates are lazy and fearful.
I did not say that.
Wait a second.
What he actually said was they're not willing to do the work, and the person who said lazy was Jeff Riddle. That was neither Peter nor James. It was Jeff Riddle who said, "You're saying we're lazy," and now he's repeating that as if that was actually what they were saying. But it is true; they are not doing the work. They're allowing Erasmus and Stephanus and Beza to do the work, and then forgetting that they did the work, and not being willing to examine what work they did. That's true. I mean, isn't this self-evident? I don't know how you guys can get around this. That's why I said last year when I started reading sections out of the book on Erasmus and Beza as conjectural critics, and I started reading what they actually said themselves about these texts. I said, this is the end of TR onlyism. In a confessional sense, because it exposes where the text actually came from and the methodology by which it came. That's why I said it. You're still with me, huh?
And to speak to the question of saying they're lazy, there's a big difference between laziness and avoiding the work because you know where it leads and you don't want to do it because you don't like the conclusion and the path that it's going to take you down.
Yeah. And
that's not laziness.
No. That was unfair.
Actually, maybe a little harder work than it would have otherwise be.
Stay lazy.
So, well, that's what Jay said, and I'm being a little rhetorical.
The method is lazy.
But anyways, I'm not gonna. That would be like me saying to you, well, James, you're just lazy because you haven't read Garnet Howard Milne's discussion of kept pure in all ages, and you keep using an anachronistic term to describe it. And I could say, Peter, you're just fearful. You're fearful of the fact that the confessional text position is right, and if it's right, then you don't have a job sifting through manuscripts or whatever.
Now catch that. He would be exactly right, because again, he's going to say no later on because Peter's going to challenge him on this, or maybe he already did and we skipped it. I don't know, but there is no reason to teach New Testament textual criticism if TR onlyism is right. If you're reading the autograph with this, we don't need those manuscripts. Shut down CSNTM. Turn off all the modules in accordance. Here's the autograph right there. There's the autograph. Thankfully, not all of the ecclesiastical text guys that way. And Doug Wilson and I are going to be addressing that yet again next month in Moscow, Idaho, by the way. And I'm going to take my 1550 with me. I'm really hopeful that Doug doesn't go there. Really, really hopeful that Doug doesn't go there, because that would be bad.
So see the difference. I'm not as fearful.
What I'm saying is it's wrong for you. Yeah. It's wrong and it's unfair for you to say that because you don't agree with my position that you're ascribing malice to me.
No.
I'm just lazy and fearful.
Can I come back to this? Because I think you're misrepresenting, and it's my fault actually because I didn't make the point clear enough. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. The theological danger of my view from your position is bigger than the theological danger of your position from mine. And therefore, you have more to be afraid of theologically okay, and rightly so if your position is right, you have more to be afraid. In other words, let me put it a different way. The dangers of my view, from your perspective, are more significant than the dangers that I see in your perspective, in your view, from mine.
Let me ask you this: Do you think that the rise of modern historical text criticism and the fact that many Protestants and now evangelicals are embracing it, do you think this has led to has this led to greater health and strength within Protestant and evangelical churches?
Now, the only way I can understand this is that he's thinking primarily of Westcott and Hort there, and ignoring the fact that we demonstrated, and many other people have demonstrated, that Erasmus and Beza, but especially Erasmus, basically used the same methodology, just without as much consistency and nearly as much information. But he used many of the exact same concepts that we use in quote-unquote modern textual critical study.
No, because I don't think it's really that powerful of a thing. That's part of the difference between you and I. I think in your view, text criticism is kind of the root that's the problem of a bad tree, and I kind of feel like my discipline doesn't have near that kind of power over people. I mean, frankly, most people have no idea about text criticism, and it doesn't affect their life.
Peter, you're training pastors.
Yeah, and this is what I'm trying to explain.
Who are going to go out and preach Sunday by Sunday, and when they preach an expositional series through the Gospel of Mark, actually, oddly enough, we have some agreement on Mark, because I know you don't believe it's original to Mark, but you think it's inspired, right? You sort of like Metzger.
Sort of like Tregelles, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
And
but anyways.
Warfield. On that, but yeah,
maybe it would be John. So you are very influential. Your views on this are influential, and it does have a generational legacy.
Yeah.
It has impact on people.
And if I'm right, that's a good thing, right?
And we're seeing,
if my position is right, that's a good thing.
Well, what I'm saying is,
what you're saying is the fruit is
what
bad.
I'm saying is that if we observe, and again, I'm not about this just pragmatically. I have a conviction about it. Out of principle,
right.
But I'm saying that pragmatically, the result of the introduction of the modern historical critical method, in this case its application to text criticism, has not been salubrious for Orthodox Christianity. I'm Orthodox with a small o.
Well, I wouldn't agree with the premise of your argument. I don't think text criticism, even if it's in its modern form, is a necessary part of the historical critical method. Certainly the methods were refined during that period, but I don't see anything fundamentally different between what I do and what Origen or Jerome did. So it can't be. I know it's very popular to do and very tempting to pin it all on the Enlightenment, but I wish it were that simple, and it's just not that simple historically.
James, let's get you.
Your question. I don't think it's harmful. No, I think it's helpful to people to actually explain to them the evidence that we do have, and not try to say, ignore the evidence in a case like 1 John 5:7. No, but in 1 John 5:7, from my view, you are ignoring the evidence.
I'm not saying ignore it.
You are.
Denying it, rejecting
of course
it.
you are.
I mean,
of course he is. Of course he's saying ignore the evidence. If this is it, then there is no evidence to look at beyond this. Or the only evidence to look at is that which substantiates this. So, but of course he's saying, let's not worry about the evidence. He's not starting with evidence. And he admits that in other places. So, look, we've gone a long time, and I apologize for that. But you can look it up. I'll link to it. I write the blog entry, so I will link to it. So, because it's 2 parts, I'll link to both parts, so you can listen to the whole thing yourself. Nothing else that we didn't play is going to change anything of the fact that you had 2 textual critical scholars who were consistent in their own perspectives, and as a result had to say that the third perspective, which is not a textual critical methodology, is incoherent. It's just incoherent because it says the TR is it, therefore the TR is it. And that really, when you boil it all down, is exactly what TR onlyism is. You can complicate that. You can try to, but it's your starting place. And well, you have to have that, and that's when they try to tie it into some type of transcendental argument. And I'm sorry, the work of Erasmus, a Roman Catholic priest, with Stephanus doing a little bit of stuff, and then Beza, to try to turn that into, well, basically what the King James Onlyists say took place between 1604 and 1611, a providential establishment of the autographs. Because that's what King James Onlyism is. King James Onlyism is, in English, this is it. This cannot be improved. That's what we're hearing from Jeff Riddle. In Greek, this is it. Cannot be improved. Let's not worry about papyri, the new unseal that's discovered in the library someplace that's never had access to. Doesn't matter. If you're reading the TR, you're reading the autographs. By definition. And so, yeah, there's no reason to have all those people doing textual critical studies. It's all a waste of time. And we didn't get to the part where he was talking about, and because there's been people who've gone off into Eastern Orthodoxy, gone off into Roman Catholicism, all because of an uncertainty about the text. And that's not why I think people end up going into those things. It's not about uncertainties about the text. And the funny thing is, they're not going to get any more certainty over there. I mean, Rome as a whole has a significantly less conservative perspective. The Roman magisterium and Roman scholarship has a significantly less conservative perspective on textual critical issues than someone like Peter Gurry or the people at Tyndale House by a long shot. And Eastern Orthodoxy just simply, I'm sorry, given, well, that's a whole nother issue. But it doesn't have anything to do with textual critical.